Oh, g'day there. How long have you been there for? Hey, young guys, Tomo here from Tomo's Tune-Ups. This is just going to be a quick little episode I'm going to do for you. Today's been probably the hottest day that we've experienced in New South Wales for quite some time, reaching over 30 degrees. So it's been quite nice. I wanted to wait till it cooled down in order for me to film something. So on this episode, I'm just going to show you how to repair some wiring and very specifically battery cables. Now, when I built this car several years ago, I was in a bit of a hurry to get it on the road. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to do and I should have done a different way, but at the time I didn't have the tools or the equipment to do it. So as you'll see here, there are a couple of very dodgy connections that I've managed to get by with, but they're not 100% perfect. So all I did was get the battery cable, stripped it back, put a connector over the top of it, put in the vise, tighten it up, and then it clamped it. So it did the job, but it doesn't look very professional. So what we're going to be doing is cutting the old terminal off. We're going to be applying a new terminal. We're going to clamp it with a proper tool, and we're going to put some new heat shrink over there. We want to make sure that we disconnect the battery before we start. We always want to ensure that we disconnect the negative side of the battery and not the positive. When you disconnect the negative, there's no earth, so therefore the circuit can't function. If you leave the earth connected but disconnect the positive cable, which is the red one, you will find that sometimes there can be a little bit of current still in the system, and it can therefore cause damage to any control units or electrical components inside there. So it can still remain a little bit of charge in there. So ensure that when you do any sort of work, whether it be battery or airbag related, always make sure that you disconnect the negative side of the battery. If you're ever unsure if there's any capacities in there and you don't know how long it's going to take before it discharges the system completely, disconnect it for 30 minutes before starting work on the system. Now once we've disconnected the battery, we're going to come down here to these terminals. So this one is really good. I've done a really good job there. I'm not overly concerned about it because it is in good condition, but this is the only one that I want to replace. So what we're going to do is loosen off this nut here. Once it's released, we're then going to cut it and then shorten it, put a new terminal on, and then clamp it and put some heat shrink on there. Now that we've taken the nut off, we can then release the terminal. So I deliberately put enough length on this when I made it, that if I needed to shorten it or redo it at any stage, I could. So we've got plenty of room here. So all we're going to be doing is cutting it just behind here where the terminal sits, and then we're going to be stripping back the wire and reapplying the terminal. Now you can see quite clearly here, the positive terminal is quite loose, and I'm sure with a bit of wiggling, it'll probably come out. So that's definitely not a good thing, but good thing it's lasted this long. So to start with, all we're going to do is just cut the old heat shrink off there, and then that'll just peel straight off. Now you can see the amount of wire as well that I didn't have properly clamped in there, so that's not a bad thing because I had it covered in heat shrink, but it's also not a good thing. So all we're going to do is just cut it directly here. So either grab a very strong pair of pliers, or even just a pair of side cutters, or even just some wire crimpers, and just cut the old wire. And hey presto, there we go. Okay, that was a bit of a Houdini right there. Now I'm just going to trim that end just a little bit so it makes it a little bit clearer. I'm not going to worry too much about these loose wires everywhere. I'll get the air blower when I go back into work next and clean it up. Now we have a new ring terminal here. So what we want to be doing is measuring out how much length we need to strip back in order for it to be hidden. So it's only about 15 mil. So I'm just going to mark it with my thumb there with my nail. Then we're going to get the razor blade and just run it around the edge. That way it'll be completely encased inside the new terminal. Now you want to be careful when you're doing this, simply because razor blades are sharp. As much as that sounds like a duh sort of moment, they are quite easy to slip and cut you. So the last thing you want to be doing is go in the hospital on a Sunday night simply because you were just being stupid and weren't paying attention. So whenever you're using a razor blade or a knife, anything sharp, anything hot, always just be super cautious with it. So now we have the terminal off, we need to get some heat shrink and put it on there before we clamp the terminal on. Okay, so I've already pre-cut a piece of heat shrink. We're just going to slide it on through here. Alright, so before we apply the heat shrink, we're just giving it a little twist just to ensure that it goes on and doesn't frail the wires everywhere. We want to slide that down as far as we can. That way, once we're done, we can then slide it back up and then do it over the terminal. Now, heat shrink is really good to have simply because it not only looks good and professional, but it also seals the joint in which you've just applied on there. Now in our case, we're going to be using red heat shrink simply because it's a red cable and it looks more professional than using black. Even though this one's in black, it's fine. So what you want to try and do is color code the wires so you know what they are. Red is generally a power wire and black is often a earth. So in our case, because we're doing the power wire, we're going to be running it over the red cable. Even though this one is in black, this is still a power cable that goes to the starter motor. So these are the pliers that we're going to be using on each of them. I don't know if you can see, but they have a number on them. Ours is number 35. We want to be using the 35 because it is a number 35 terminal, so it'll clamp it exactly the way that we want it. Okay, so what we're going to be doing first is just giving it a little bit more of a twist. That way it's all nice and neat and together. Then we're going to grab the terminal and we're going to slide it directly over the top. Now we may find that not all the wire is going to go in there, but like I said before, it's fine because we have the heat shrink to go over there and protect the rest of the loose wire. So that's actually a lot better fitting than what it was originally, so that's great. Now we're going to grab our pliers, we're going to put them over the top. So now it's at 90 degrees, give another clamp. Hey presto, she is done. Next thing, you're going to grab the heat shrink, give it a bit of a twist, and we're going to bring it up to the terminal. Alright, so once the heat shrink is over the terminal, we're now going to get the heat gun and we're going to melt the heat shrink. Okay, so next thing we grab our heat gun. Now this is a Virgin heat gun that I bought from Snap-on, and by Virgin I mean not the song by Madonna. We're going to get it going and then adjust the flame accordingly. Now remember, we're not trying to burn down the entire car, so we don't need a huge flame, so probably just a little bit more than that will be suffice. All you want to be doing is just applying the heat to the heat shrink and just moving it back and forth, up and down, so that way it completely seals the wiring. Obviously just be careful, it is going to be hot, so you want to make sure that you've got ample room to be able to get it in there properly. This one is just a general heat shrink. You can get ones that shrink to 4 times their size, so if it comes out at 10 mil for instance, it'll shrink down to around 2.5 mil. They're really quite handy depending on the application that you're using it for. Okay, so now that we've finished, wait for it to cool down and then we can reattach it to here. Now for you auto electricians out there, you're probably looking at some of this wiring going, what the hell is this? Why does it look so shit? This is the original harness from the car, so it is something that I want to upgrade in the future, but something I don't have the money for at the moment. So all we're going to be doing is just reapplying this the way that it came apart, and then we're going to reconnect the battery, make sure everything works. Make sure you tighten it using a spanner. If you use a socket, that'll be fine, but just don't go ham with it and over tighten it, otherwise you'll crush it and destroy it. This might actually be something I change in the future. Maybe just run some new wires to the alternator or the starter motor, depending what I think needs to be changed given the condition of the current wiring. It is quite safe at the moment. There are no breaks or anything in the wire. Everything I've physically checked when I had it all apart, so there's no drama there in terms of it burning to the ground. I forgot to mention also, it's always a good idea to put a rag over there. That way if it has a bit of tension inside the battery cable and it decides to fling back, it's not going to earth out. Once it's on, you're then just going to tighten up the nut. Now here's Tomo's handy tip of the day. Always keep a spare towel in the car, not because you want to go to the beach and you want to dry yourself off before you get in the car, but if you ever need to go and work on your car and it's on the side of the road, the last thing you want to be doing is rolling around on the road and getting covered in absolute dirt, grease, grime, water, whatever it may be. Lay it down before you do any work. That way, when you're finished, you pick it up, throw it in the car, and you remain probably 90% dry and all clean. Okay, so the last thing to do is check our work. Make sure that whenever you're finished doing a job, you always either go for a road test or plug it in and make sure everything works, especially in a state that is easy enough to access. So I'm not going to start up because it is late at night. Everything's turned on, everything is functional, and hey presto, we have rectified it. So that's how you replace a battery terminal. Make sure you use the right gauge terminal as well as the right tools and heat shrink as well. Heat shrink will help not only keep it safe but also look professional. I'm going to go get myself a beer. Stay COVID safe, guys, and we'll see you next time on Tomo's Tune Ups.